Today we're going to look at two language types, figurative language and literal language. You've looked at both of these before in other classes, but we're going to decide how you can use both figurative and literal language to enhance your writing. To understand what figurative language is, you need to understand the difference between figurative and literal. Let's start with the easier one, literal. I'm tired and I'm going home. This means, literally, I am tired and I am returning to my house. There is no other secret meaning there. The author is saying exactly what they mean. And there's definitely a place for literal language. But sometimes literal language isn't exciting or interesting. Imagine if we only just said exactly what we meant, no adjectives, no adverbs, no painting pictures with our words. Things would get a little bit boring. Figurative language, on the other hand, is to not mean what you say, but to imply something else. For example, if I tell you you're the apple of my eye, you are not literally an apple in my eyeball. Instead, you're important to me. But doesn't it sound a little bit more interesting to say, you're the apple of my eye? Still confused? Think of it this way. Literal is stated directly, but figurative is imaginary. It couldn't actually be happening. Literal would be, I am so hungry, I could eat 5 slices of that pizza. Well, I'm pretty hungry and I actually could. Figurative, though, is imaginary. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Not really. Not bones and hair and all. But it's a way to exaggerate what you're saying and to emphasize it. That's where figurative language really comes in. It draws attention to what you're saying and it makes it bigger than it seems. It's hyperbolic. It's exaggerated. Why use figurative language? Also known as descriptive language, figurative language helps the writer paint a picture in the reader's mind. And that's ultimately the goal of a writer, to create a great story with a beautiful image in the reader's head. If you're someone who likes to draw, this might be a fun activity to help you cement literal versus figurative in your head. Let's take the phrase, it is raining cats and dogs. What would that literally look like if I said it's raining cats and dogs and I was being literal? That would mean there are actually cats and dogs raining from the sky. Depending on how you feel about animals, that can be adorable or terrifying. But you could draw, under the word literal, a bunch of cats and dogs coming down from the sky. On the other side, figuratively, it's just a way of me saying it is raining so heavily. It is raining cats and dogs. I'm just trying to emphasize how heavy the rain is. So under the word figurative, you could draw lots and lots and lots of raindrops. Let's practice quickly. Brian was a wall, bouncing every tennis ball back over the net. Well, he's not literally a wall, so that means I'm talking figuratively or using figurative language. But we also want to understand what that means. It's not just enough to identify it as figurative language. We want to know what the meaning is behind it. So look at this multiple choice really quickly. This metaphor of Brian being a wall compares him to a wall because he's a strong tennis player. He's very tall. He kept missing the balls, or his body was made of cells like a wall. What do you think? Yep, it's because he was a strong tennis player. But think again about the emphasis. Instead of saying he's a very strong tennis player, if I say he's a wall, it paints a picture of nothing getting by him. There are many types of figurative language. I listed them over to the right, and I'm sure you've heard of many of them before. Metaphor and simile, hyperbole, personification, and idiom, onomatopoeia, understatement, alliteration and imagery, and cliche and symbol. And these aren't even all of them. The definitions are important, but more importantly is their effect on the reader and why we need to use them. I'd like to read you one of my favorite poems. And when I pause, think for a minute about which images are figurative, imaginary, there to emphasize, and which are literal. Then I'll reveal my thoughts. So again, I'm going to pause here and there. Don't be alarmed or think the video is stopping, but just ask yourself, are these images literal or figurative? This poem is called Ode to My Socks by Pablo Neruda. I'm going to read it to you in 2 sections. At the end of each slide, I'm going to pause for a minute to let you think about which images are literal, actually happening, and which are figurative, imaginary, emphasizing things by being more than reality. Let's go ahead and try. Mara Mori brought me a pair of socks which she knitted herself with her sheepherder's hands, 2 socks as soft as rabbits. I slipped my feet into them as if they were 2 cases knitted with threads of twilight and goatskin. Violent socks, my feet were 2 fish made of wool, 2 long sharks, sea blue, shot through by 1 golden thread, 2 immense blackbirds, 2 cannons, my feet were honored in this way by these heavenly socks. They were so handsome for the first time my feet seemed to me unacceptable, like 2 decrepit firemen unworthy of that woven fire of those glowing socks. Take a minute, look over this first slide. What is actually happening or literal, and which images are figurative? If I were pulling out the literal pieces, Mara Mori brought over socks that she knit herself. The narrator did slip his feet into them, and they were handsome socks. Everything else, though, is figurative. Are they actually as soft as 2 rabbits? No, but it emphasizes how soft they are. Are his feet 2 fish, 2 sharks in blue? No, but the socks are so sleek, that's how he feels. And suddenly his feet feel important and powerful being in these socks. They are 2 immense blackbirds, 2 cannons. His feet were honored. That's where the figurative language comes in. He could have just said all of this in 1 sentence. Mara Mori brought me 2 socks and I liked them a lot. But this paints a picture and makes us feel like we actually have the socks on our feet. Let's continue. Nevertheless, I resisted the sharp temptation to save them somewhere as schoolboys keep fireflies, as learned men collect sacred texts. I resisted the mad impulse to put them in a golden cage and each day give them birdseed and pieces of pink melon. Like explorers in the jungle who hand over the very rare green deer to the spit and eat it with remorse, I stretched out my feet and pulled on the magnificent socks and then my shoes. The moral of my ode is this: beauty is twice beauty, and what is good is doubly good, when it is a matter of 2 socks made of wool in winter. Take a moment, try and decide what is literal and what's figurative. He starts by saying he resisted a temptation. That's literal. But then he describes examples that are figurative. He basically is saying he wanted to just keep them in a box and never wear them, but what good is that? I especially like the image where he says he wanted to save them like schoolboys keep fireflies. But if you were someone who kept fireflies when you were little, you know that they don't last too long in a jar. And these socks are useless unless he puts them on his feet and lets them actually come out and do what they need to do. So most of this page is figurative. They're not actually going to be in a cage. He's not actually going to feed them birdseed and melon. They're not actually explorers. But he does again begin and end with something really literal. At the end he says they're doubly good when they're 2 socks made of wool in winter and you wear them. What did we learn? Well, if you feel comfortable answering these questions, you've got it. And if you can't answer these questions, send me a message and we'll figure it out. What is the difference between literal and figurative language? And why do we use figurative language? What does it do for the reader? Okay, now head to the figurative language assessment at the very bottom of the Step 2 folder. If you have trouble finding it, it's on the same slide as the windows as well. Good luck!